Welcome to Risk and Resilience Podcast, and I am your host, Fox Ahmed. And in this episode, I have some fascinating updates to share. So imagine this for a second. I think over the past week, what we've seen is that there is an AI tool that has spread so quickly across an entire country that the regulators had to step in and warn people to slow down in the use. We also have a well-known hacker group which has kind of started threatening companies using stolen cloud data. We also have a government-linked insider, which has been accused of copying highly sensitive social security information onto a USB drive. And at the same time, there's this banking malware, which is quietly draining money from people's account in real time. Now, on the surface of all of these stories, you may hear is that if you look at the root causes and dig a little bit deeper, they all point to the same underlying problems that we face in cybersecurity today. And that's exactly what I want to walk you through in this episode. Because once you see the patterns behind these stories, you'll start to understand where the real risks are kind of heading. So let's start with the first story, which is probably the most futuristic one, but also one of the most concerning ones I've read. There's an open source AI agent called OpenClaw, and that has been spreading incredibly fast, particularly across developer communities. And what makes this different from your typical AI tools is that it's just not responding to prompts or answering questions. It's actually capable of taking action on a particular kind of process system itself. So imagine this, instead of it behaving like a chatbot, this type of AI can execute tasks, automate your workflows, and also interact with other kind of softwares. And in some cases can even run commands directly on the machine, which essentially would turn itself into some kind of a digital operator rather than an assistant. Now, if you think about this for a moment, what you're really doing is giving this AI um, or software that is still evolving a level of access that traditionally only trusted users would have had access to it. And that's where that's where the concern starts to grow, because companies and developers are adopting this kind of technology extremely quickly, and using it for things like automating their internal processes, managing data, or even running business operations. But the security side of things still hasn't finally kind of fully caught up from that side. I think for me, one of the biggest risks being discussed right now is something called prompt injection. So this is where things get particularly interesting from a cybersecurity perspective. In simple terms, AI systems follow kind of your typical instructions, but those instructions don't always come from trusted sources. So if a attacker can embed some sort of malicious instruction inside the data that the AI can processes, the AI might unknowingly follow those instructions. I think one example I can give is, for example, if an AI system is scanning emails or documents and someone inserts a hidden command telling it to expose sensitive data or override its rules, I think there'll be a chance that the system could actually comply with that request, especially if it hasn't been kind of properly secured or any guardrails in place. Now, imagine that happening in an environment where the AI has access to internal systems, files, or databases, and you can start to see how this could quickly turn into a serious security issue. And this is exactly why regulators are kind of stepping in. Not necessarily because the technology itself is a danger, but because the speed of adoption is outpacing the implementation of proper safeguards. Now, as all of this is happening in the world of AI, there's another side of cybersecurity that hasn't changed much at all, and that is that the attackers are going after your data. Um, for the next update, I don't know if you've been following kind of cybersecurity news for over the last couple of years. You probably come across the name ShinyHunters. So this is a group that has been linked to some of the largest data breaches we've seen in the past. And their approach is very direct, but incredibly effective as well. So instead of locking systems or disrupting kind of operations, they focus on gaining access to large data sets, particularly from cloud platforms. and then they would and then using that data as leverage. So in this case here, the group has kind of reportedly targeting information connected to Salesforce environments, which is significant because Salesforce is systemically widely used by companies to manage customer relations. The CRM tool, meaning that it would often contain a lot of detailed records around customer information, email addresses, communications, internal business information, as such. So if an attacker did manage to get access to that kind of system, they're not just getting random kind of data sets. I think they're getting structured data which could be valuable, that can have real consequences if this has been exposed publicly. I think once the data is extracted, I think what the attackers typically reach out to the company, and then they will seek demand for payment. So essentially saying that if they're not paid, I think the data will be kind of released publicly, which creates a difficult situation for any organization involved. Because on the one hand, paying the attackers doesn't guarantee anything, but on the other hand, a public data leak could lead to other types of issues, regulatory issues, reputational damage, and even loss of customers' trust. And that is, what really highlights as to how much corporate data has shifted into, cloud platforms over the years, which has made systems more flexible and scalable, but also has introduced new points of vulnerability for any organizations. Because instead of protecting a single network, companies now have to secure multiple interconnected services, and attackers only have to find one weak point. So, both of these stories, again, involve some sort of external threats in different ways. But the next story, which I had in mind, kind of shifts the focus a little bit, because it raises concern around what happens when the risk comes from inside your organization. So around insider risk, I would say. So there are reports going around suggesting that there's a former employee that was connected to the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, which may have accessed sensitive data from systems linked to the Social Security Administration. And according to this allegation here, is that the data may have been copied onto a USB drive. Now, it's important to know that these claims are still being investigated and have been denied, but even the possibility of something like this raises some serious questions. Because when you're dealing with systems that contain information tied to hundreds of millions of people, including identification data and personal records, the risks associated with unauthorized access becomes extremely high. And what makes insider threats particularly challenging is that individuals involved already have kind of legitimate access to the system, which means traditional security measures designed to keep attackers may not detect unusual behavior right away. So instead of focusing on breaking into a system, the challenge becomes identifying when someone is using their access in a way that they shouldn't. And historically, some of the most significant data exposures have involved insider threats rather than external hackers, precisely because of the level of access that the employees have. Now, let's take this one step further, because the final story, which I have for today's episode, shows that how these risks are now kind of extending all the way to your personal devices. So, security researchers have identified there's a banking Trojan targeting users of the instant payment system called Pix. And this is particularly concerning because Pix software, a payment system, is designed for real-time transactions, meaning money moves instantly between accounts, like real-time kind of payments. So from a user perspective, this is convenient. It is incredibly useful because you can send money as soon as possible, and it'll be there to your kind of beneficiary, also recipient and stuff whenever. And but from a hacker's perspective, it creates more of an opportunity, because once the transaction is completed, it's very difficult to reverse when the payment's gone outside the bank to another bank. And I think this malware here itself kind of infects Android devices and remains inactive until the user kind of opens the banking application. And at then which point it begins kind of capturing sensitive information, screen grabs such as login credentials and authentication codes. And I think in some of the most advanced cases in this research is that the malware can exploit accessibility features within the operating system, which allows it to be more effectively kind of control the device itself. So what that would mean is that it can open your applications, it can navigate the interfaces, and even authorize transactions without the user fully realizing what's happening. So instead of this attack attacking the bank directly, the attackers are kind of essentially using the victim's own device to carry out the transaction. And because everything's happening so quickly, the funds can be transferred before the user has a chance to react. So this is something to kind of be aware of because it's currently in Brazil, and we'll see if this kind of reaches other kind of jurisdictions, regions on that side. So if you take a step back on the four of the kind of stories I kind of shared in this episode, what you find is that each situation involves a different type of system, whether it's AI automation, whether it's related to cloud platforms or government databases, or even mobile banking applications. But they all revolve around the same core issue: the access management. Who has access to systems? The question is, how is that access being used, and what happens when it's misused? Because a lot of the organizations with technology that they have is becoming more interconnected and more powerful, and the impact of a single point of failure becomes even more larger. And I think that's why today, across cybersecurity today is less about isolating threats and more about managing access across a complex system. So next time when you do come across some kind of these kind of cybersecurity headlines, instead of just focusing on what happened, it's worth asking the deeper question is, how did access play a role in this situation? Because more often than not, that's where the real kind of control weakness or the real story is. So thank you for listening to this episode. Do like and share, and I'll be dropping more episodes more frequently as other stories evolve. Speak to you all soon.